So I had a comment on one of my videos that really stopped to make me think. I wanted to address it because I think it's a really good topic. Like, I've lived in the United States most of my life, except for the last few years. I've moved to the UK 3 years ago. I've seen both systems up close, having a child, being a parent. I lived the US system, and somehow I've never asked this question, but it's really, really valid. Why are schools free at the point of need in the United States, but healthcare isn't? So today I kind of wanted to unpack it, not too much in a political sense, but more in a here's the system and this is the cultural sides of it. Because I feel like once you understand the psychology behind it, everything starts to make a little bit more sense, not just for healthcare in the United States and education in the United States versus outside of the state's borders, but also just a lot of other systemic things that are in place in the US. So basically in the US, we are raised to believe that school helps everybody. And ultimately, that a smarter population is a skilled workforce and you are literate and comprehensive, which is debatable, and it's foundational for a good working future. And because it benefits the whole society in the end, it feels normal to fund it collectively. No one really argues in the United States, why should my taxes pay for your kid to learn math? Although that's not 100% true. There are people that are like, my kids are grown, why should I have to pay property taxes for schools? But it is the minority. But when it comes to healthcare, suddenly it becomes, why should I pay for someone else's choices? I literally have had people say to me, I don't want universal healthcare in the United States because I don't want to have to pay for other people's abortions. To which I responded saying, well, I don't want to have to pay for other people's liver transplants because they're alcoholics, but that's kind of what socialized medicine is. You don't get to choose, at least in that sense. You just hope that it helps society to become more productive, better workers, and ultimately benefit society. It's basically the same thought process of education, but they just can't seem to connect the dots. Perspective when it comes to healthcare starts to shift from a shared good and a benefit to society to individual responsibility. And that is definitely a divide that the United States of America seems to thrive on. In the United States, the word free usually means nobody pays, meaning it's absolutely 100% funded by somebody else, which is never actually the case, is it? Nothing is really free in this world. And in the UK, you have this concept of free, meaning you just don't pay at the point of use, meaning you pay up front so that you can access it when you need it. Of course, both of these scenarios take into account the economic burden, not a whole concept of freedom and everything like that. And I think a lot of Americans don't really understand that dichotomy, and also don't understand that they actually do pay in advance. They do give a lot of their extra money in advance anyway. So why do you have to pay on the front end and the back end? Why is that acceptable? When in education, like the UK healthcare system, you pay in advance through your taxes, and then your children, you and your children or grandchildren, whomever, have access to education at least up until you're 18 years old. But Americans, they just don't get it. When they hear the words free healthcare, what they actually hear is, so I have to pay for somebody else's stuff? When in reality, we kind of already do, even in healthcare, which is much more of a mind blow when you break down the actual pieces of it. Even though we are still paying in advance through premiums that are taken out of our paycheck through our jobs, through deductibles that we have to meet before we can even get approved for treatment, through co-pays that we have to pay just to see the doctor. And then it's okay and acceptable for us to get a surprise bill at the end of our service. That's okay. But imagine if we applied the same logic in the United States to education. We're going to pay all our taxes. Then we're going to pay for all the school supplies. Then we're going to pay for all of the events and fundraisers. And then once your child graduates at 18, you get a bill. And that's okay. No one would accept that in the United States of America at all. So why do we accept it for US healthcare? I think some of it boils down to trust and the abstract versus the actual, like, tangible. So US education, the schools in the United States are local, right? They're run by your local district, your town, your county at best. You know your district, you know the people that your kids go to school with. It is something very much in your face. You can interact with the teachers and the staff. And it's very, very personal. It's on a very, very intimate level in people's lives in the United States. Whereas healthcare in the United States is a much more abstract thing. Healthcare feels like this like giant distant system full of complications, full of lots of words and definitions we're never going to fully understand. And I think that Americans just sometimes have a really hard time accepting giant distant systems. They don't want a national anything really other than like security. That's really what the whole concept of the United States of America is built on. It's about identifying together as a union as far as a national situation, as far as being part of a country in the world that we live in. But each individual state, town, county should be allowed to run themselves as they see fit. That's basically what the country was founded on. So even if the end result is better access and ultimately costs less for the American people, it just doesn't feel as trustworthy, especially in today's world where you consider how little confidence the citizens and residents of the United States of America in 2026 have in any of their federal institutions. Giving up something so personal, something that could be super detrimental or could determine whether you live or die, quite literally, into the hands of this institution or this level of government that you have no confidence in, it feels like you're signing your own death warrant, I think, to a lot of people. The other thing is education has an out, okay? So the US education system primarily is built to create a workforce. If you do need new education or the school gets something wrong, it matters, absolutely, but it doesn't have as big of a long-term effect because you can always unlearn and relearn something, right? I'm actually experiencing that right now in real time. A lot of the stuff that I learned in the US school systems and even just from society and environment and all of that, I have to kind of unlearn and relearn all over again because I'm in a different system, different society where a lot of those rules not only don't apply, but don't really even make sense outside of the United States. So it definitely has long-term effects, but not nearly as severe as they are in the US. But healthcare is really personal, right? So the emotional hurdle and the emotional investment is so much higher, it's so much stronger. A lot of people in the United States think, I want control over this because I don't trust the government and because the stakes are so high, and I do not want the government to have any say in it whatsoever. Not fully understanding or comprehending what socialized medicine actually is. Even if the control we have is honestly questionable at best. This is really the sleeper reason I think that Americans reject instinctively universal healthcare. It's just not what we're used to. We don't question what we grew up with as Americans usually. We are used to free schools, but we're also used to employer-based insurance for our healthcare. Insurance cards and networks and copays and deductibles. That's what we know. That's what feels normal. And human beings tend to not really examine what feels normal to them, especially when there's not many people around them that get anything different or live any differently. Now, when you're someone like me, who got to see a different model up close in person, even in the United States, it starts to open your eyes. See, I had always believed in universal healthcare. I wasn't 100% convinced that it would actually work until my dad got sick. When my dad got diagnosed with cancer, as a veteran of the United States Army, he is eligible for social health care. They took care of him. They took care of him in every possible way. They paid for his treatment, any hospitalization he had, any emergency room visits or ambulance rides that he had, any of his radiation. Even towards the end, had to be in hospice. They set up and everything in my parents' home. They set up the healthcare worker to come every day and take care of him and wash him and everything that he needed. They even supplied a counselor for me and my mother, a free session to give us some tools in how to deal with taking care of him, how to deal with, accepting the death, how to explain it and have conversation with the kids that were around. And we never got a bill. Not 1 cent came out of my parents' pocket. That is what universal healthcare is. That is what socialized medicine is. And it works. This is even an underfunded, very, very skeleton system. But it still worked. Had it not worked, had my parents had to pay for all of that out of pocket, they would have lost their house. And that's something that they should never have had to worry about. And thankfully, they didn't. But it was only because of the universal healthcare system that was put into place in the United States of America for veterans. And I will always be eternally grateful that that system was in place and that my parents could take advantage of it when they needed it. And now I'm here in the UK and I get to see it even in better practice, in every day-to-day practice. When I had a stomach issue and I needed medical attention, I got it right away. When my partner and my daughter needed any kind of medical assistance or had any kind of ailments, it's getting taken care of. Now, I'm not saying that the NHS system is perfect, because it definitely is not perfect by any means. But that doesn't mean that it shouldn't exist. But it's just further proof that a system that follows the free educational system and mindset in America does actually work in the UK and other developed countries, but also in the United States of America. So when you pull all of this stuff together, when you think about the fact that we accept free school because it feels collective and something that society should do for the better good, the betterment of society in the future, you're not getting the whole story. And the saddest part is there's actually other programs, socialized medicine programs in the United States that work very, very effectively. But the government just doesn't want to expand them for the masses. But we'll get into that in a different video. I've experienced 2 different forms of socialized healthcare. And I've experienced free education up until I was 18 and paid education in the form of higher education, college, university. The paid education wasn't any better than the schooling that I got in the free education, and the paid healthcare that I experienced in the United States was never any better than the free healthcare that I've gotten here in the UK. So paying for it isn't always better. And it's not about having choices in the conventional sense, because you don't really have any extra choices by having private insurance. You just have to pay for it. You just have to pay for it even more and more and more every single day to survive. Anyway, those are my thoughts from my personal experiences. I definitely want to hear all of you guys' thoughts and comments on that. So leave them below, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you. Bye.